Hello everyone and welcome to the Unconventional Intentional Homemaking Podcast. Today we are going to be talking about managing responsibilities in the home and sharing that load. But first, I'm Issa and this is my wife Blaise.
Hello!
And I guess we should define what we mean by sharing the load. We don't necessarily mean that everyone has to be equal and everything has to do everything precisely down the middle or whatever. That's not what we mean.
No, it is much more about that equitable division of labour.
Yes.
And that might be that one person does all of it while the other person does other things for various reasons.
Yeah.
Every household is going to be different.
Yeah, or it might be that you split things precisely down the middle, or you do a 70-30. There's a lot of ways you can divide it. When we say sharing the workload, we don't mean being entirely equitable? Equal.
Yeah, we mean being equitable,
Yeah.
not being equal.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's also trying to recognise like all the different types of tasks there are. Like some of them are more physical, some of them are more I want to use the word menial, I'm not sure if that's what I mean.
Labour intensive.
Yeah, and others are more mentally
And they're dull,
intensive.
yeah, and that some of them are dull, some of them take 4 times as long as the others. But there's a lot of things, like when you actually, even if you don't consider yourself a homemaker, if you start to break down all of the things that you just do with taking care of yourself and your household, there's a lot of tasks in there. And those are the things we mean by homemaking, is all of those things that go into making up a household.
Yeah, that's all the what's of homemaking, like the cooking, the cleaning, the groceries, the laundry, the DIY. I include DIY in there.
Yeah.
But we have a whole podcast on that
We
already.
do have a whole podcast on that. But I guess once you've worked out, every household needs to devise that labour up somehow, but not everyone really stops and thinks about why that's important.
The why of the actual homemaking tasks, or the why of the divvying them up
The why
appropriately?
the why of the sharing.
The why of the sharing. Oh, well,
Tired, burnout.
Tired, burnout, resentment, just, yes, having good relationships, having the house be smoother, less stress, like pick your poison. I mean, there's so many reasons why it's important to have these discussions and...
Yeah, and decide what's right for your household.
Yeah, rather than just assuming and letting things fall wherever they fall, and then it's very easy for one person to end up doing a lot, like even in rented accommodation. Like when I was a student, like there's always the one who doesn't clean up after themselves, and there's always the one that then overcompensates for that, and then like you have people who see different levels of mess as well.
Yeah, and people that struggle with different levels of mess. Like some people can't go to sleep if they've left something untidy, and others can live in mess quite happily without it bothering them in the slightest.
And so that different levels of acceptability, if you're leaving it to just, hey, if you see it needs doing, do it.
Yeah, you're going to be in for some problems, for the most part. Unless you happen to live with people that have the same vision of you of what tidy looks like.
Yeah.
I think we probably have different views of tidy.
Oh yeah, the house gets much messier when I'm in charge.
Which is ironic because I'm actually the messier person out of the two of us. But the mess bothers me more.
Yeah. And I guess that's also like, is mess versus cleanliness and clean. Like you can have a lot of mess but have a really clean house, or you can have a dirty house and no mess.
Yeah, there is difference, but I guess part of my why it bothers me more is because I know that inevitably it's going to be me that's going to have to deal with it. So the messier it gets, the more work I'm going to have to do in the future. Because that's my role in the house, is that I do most of the tidying.
Yeah, we have put some things in place. So we have put some things in place that we can discuss a bit later in the podcast on some of the things that we do.
Yes.
But I think that initial recognising that getting started with like just the load share and all the different complexities and all the different things that can go into the decisions that need to be made on how to share those tasks out. So another big part of not only divvying up those tasks, but having that conversation repetitively.
Yeah, so we do make sure that we have those conversations every time we need to. And our life has changed, and with it so have our responsibilities. And if you haven't listened before, I do most of the homemaking. I am the person that actually doesn't work at the minute. I'm a student, so I am busy doing other things, but I'm not bringing in any money. And
so I would like to caveat that I disagree. You work very hard. You do a lot.
I said I didn't work and bring in money. I didn't say I wasn't.
You said you don't work, and then you caveated with I don't bring in money. You work very hard. You do a lot of things. You do a lot of stuff that is very valuable, but you don't bring in money, which is not the same.
No, I don't currently bring in money. And yet it hasn't always been that way. Like, I have brought in money, I have my own career, and it was circumstances that brought us to where we are now, which is that you bring in the money and I don't.
And you spend it all.
Yeah. Seems fair to me.
That works very well for us. And so yeah, it's that ongoing discussion as not only your situation changing, but people's health might change, your mental energy, your physical energy. Like, particularly as we get older, there's going to be things that are going to affect both of us in different ways. And so, like, taking all that into account when allocating these tasks and having that conversation repetitively is a big part of that.
I think the point of this is that for us, we found that having conversations about what responsibilities there are and who is in charge of them was actually really fundamental to our relationship and how our house works. We've both been in situations before where we weren't necessarily entirely happy with the division of labour for different reasons, for very different reasons, but because we've both been married before, so we're talking about previous relationships, so it's quite important to us that this relationship, we took those things into account early because we'd learnt that not having those discussions isn't always the best thing.
And we did have an advantage with this relationship, being that a lot of the assumed roles were removed with us, being married and both women.
Yeah, so it wasn't an assumed, like when I got married the first time, I had very unrealistic ideals of what I was supposed to be as a wife, and it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, it's different when you're both wives.
Yeah, so it's just different when you're both wives, because you have to have that conversation and go, oh, we can't assume that either of us are in charge of things.
Yeah.
And for some people, there is no in charge. It just works.
No, you're definitely in charge in this household.
Yeah, I'm definitely in charge. But
I guess that's actually also an interesting point, is with sharing the load. One of you taking the lead.
On different things, yeah. Like, I have very little to do. I have very little to do with what bills are going out when, because I just trust that you've got that.
And I do.
Luckily you do. But we also know that I have a particular weakness in financial areas, so that if I was in charge of that, I don't got this.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were in charge of, like, when we took a much more equal on meal planning, for example, we ate takeouts a lot more.
Especially on my weeks.
So we just have different strengths and weaknesses, and we try and play to those. And your ability to out-earn me also matters.
Plays it. I mean, I would say I don't have the ability to out-earn you, because I definitely have a ceiling. But you could out-earn me in the career that you've chosen.
Yes, I could. It's just much more hit and miss, may not happen.
Yeah.
You have a more guaranteed level income, I don't.
Yeah,
I think is the thing.
And that is something that we take into account with our with our household load sharing. Is, like, for me to be able to focus on my career to give us that stability. But going forward, that might change.
Yeah, maybe one day. Who knows?
Maybe one day.
Well, I've got my degree and a second degree. I need to do a third then. No, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked.
You're getting a little bit sidetracked, yeah. So I think it's really amazing where we've got to, and that's been a lot of discussions. We've been surprisingly dynamic in that when a change has happened, then we've sat down, we've had those family meetings, being a family of 2.
The dog and cat don't get any say whatsoever.
The dog and the cat are not part of the discussions on who's cleaning up what, no.
She's trying to be. Her tail's wagging with mention of them.
Whereas, like, with my previous relationships, like, those conversations, because they were in heterosexual relationships, I think that there was a lot more assumed roles. And breaking out of those had, like, certain layers of difficulty, like, just recognising those assumptions and then breaking out of them and then feeling okay to break out of them, I think was actually surprisingly challenging in a way that we don't have now, because we're immediately unconventional. So continuing to be unconventional in other ways is just that much easier.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have any preconceived ideas of who should be doing what. So therefore we have a conversation about it instead, and that's proven to be really, really successful. And had I known that with my first marriage, but also had I been more self-aware and more capable of having difficult discussions, because I absolutely wasn't ready for it back then I can see that would have worked so much better for me, even in that relationship with the assumed gender norms and things.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. Like, so you mentioned before how you took on a lot of assumed role yourself.
No, it's complicated in that I had a preconceived notion of what my role should be, and I desperately wanted to fulfill that role in my head. I was utterly hopeless at actually physically doing it.
Well, again, because on top of that you were working.
I was also working. I was also out earning him.
And trying to then also be, quote unquote, the perfect wife. By your definition, your standards, your preconceived notions of what you thought that should look like.
Yes, and I also, because I had those, and I've got a very all or nothing mindset, like, because I didn't meet my own expectations, I just kind of gave up trying to do anything. Not anything literally, but
yeah,
you know what I mean. I gave up on the idea of being a good wife completely.
And now you're divorced.
And now I'm divorced. Go figure. But also, like, he had issues as well in that he did do his share of the house and the cooking and everything, but he also had some underlying assumptions and assumptions on where our life would go, and we ended up differing quite dramatically on what we thought about life in the end.
And I think that's also something to consider and pay attention to, particularly in your situation, where you had taken on the world and all of this load. And
he wasn't asking me to.
And he wasn't asking you to.
No.
But also, if he tried too hard, I presume if he tried too hard to step into those roles, you weren't making space, and you probably would have been very guilty, felt guilty, and then the resentment builds up, and then you're not only taking everything on, but you're not giving him the opportunity to...
Not entirely.
Yeah.
Like, not entirely in that... Because we never had these conversations, we didn't know that we'd assumed any gender roles or that any should exist or not. I had this expectation of growing up of what a wife should be. I wasn't meeting that. He hadn't asked me to. He was actually, back in the 2000s, you called it new man, didn't you? He was quite the new man in that he did take responsibilities. If we had children, he would have been incredibly hands-on. So I was expecting something of us as a whole that he wasn't asking or expecting. And then that just didn't gel well together, because, yeah, you're right, I felt guilty.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't fulfilling what I saw as my end of the deal. And then because I felt guilty and I became unable to do it to any ability, he then started feeling resentment that I wasn't doing anything, which I was, but you know what I mean. Resentment grows.
Yes.
Is that making any sense?
I mean, it makes sense to me, because being like you are currently the person who, once again, has taken on the majority of the load. And then I come down and try and help, and I'm not always helpful.
Yeah, some of that's YouTube. Is that you've now learnt to ask, can I clean this thing, or are you planning on doing it in a video? And I'm like, no, don't touch that mark on the wall, that's going in a video.
So we have to have extra layers of communication above and beyond many households, simply because you also run a YouTube channel and you need to be recording a lot of this.
And if you clean that mark on the wall, I will not have any content.
Yes. But then there's other times when you're like, why is this dirty? Why are you not pulling? You've never said.
I've never said that.
You've never said that to me. But there's also that I feel guilty when I feel like I'm not pulling my weight, and so embroidered in all of these discussions is this underlying assumptions and feelings and resentments and guilt, and there's just. It's, again, very psychological. There's so many layers to just who's cooking tonight.
We make things sound very, very complicated.
That's because in our household, things are very complicated. Now, to be fair, we're also a neurodiverse household. So I have autism. So for me, clear structure, clear instructions, clear responsibilities are hyper important.
Yeah.
More so.
Yeah, they weren't so much for me.
Yeah.
I was much more comfortable with.
Oh, you with your potential ADHD, laissez-faire, chaotic lifestyle, you over there.
Yeah, I was much more able to go with the flow than you are. But I also do really, really well when I'm in that kind of routine and everyone knows their expectations. So being with you has been eye-opening to me to realise that, hey, structure can work.
But you wouldn't have that structure independently of me.
Oh, absolutely
because
not, no.
You do it for me.
Yeah, I do it for you, mostly. You know, I absolutely wouldn't.
And actually, when we first moved in together, we were much more laissez-faire about roles, responsibilities, the cleaning, like particularly very early on.
Yeah.
It was a do it if you see something needs doing, can you just do it?
Yeah, but we also did have those discussions fairly early because you've been burnt for a different reason than me in your previous marriage.
Yeah, so
actually the fair division of labour was actually really, really important to you in a way that it wasn't for me.
Yeah, so whereas you had gone into a relationship and taken everything on your shoulders, including actually out earning, I had been out earning very early and knew that would be the case quite early in my previous marriage. And then I had this expectation of having a house spouse. And I feel like that there were discussions, but maybe not explicit enough. Maybe I didn't make my expectations clear enough. But at the same time, when I was also the only one who could drive, so this is like the driving thing was a real big bugbear of mine when we got together, which you can drive, so that's not that was not a problem. But because my husband couldn't drive, not only was I getting home from work and he not only had not started dinner but didn't know what was for dinner, which as someone who is very structured, I also have blood sugar issues, so I have to be eating at certain times and it has to be very structured, very planned. Like none of that was happening, and then I would come home and then at the weekends he was expecting me to drive him around to all of his hobbies and to the groceries, and then all my weekend was spent doing housework and meals and groceries.
And you're going, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for a house spouse.
Yes, exactly. And then I was like, well, what have you been doing all day? Oh, you know, he was actually diagnosed with ADHD, which is one of the reasons why we suspect with you, because we see some of the similarities. It's very interesting how two such similar and yet so different people, and a lot of it comes down to, you know, different coping strategies and stuff. And those different assumptions. And so there was just like, we didn't have the conversations, and the expectations, whether implicit or explicit, weren't being met. And so when we moved in together, I kind of had that trauma, like quote unquote trauma, like, because it was really difficult for me having autism, and I didn't have a diagnosis then, so I didn't know I had autism then, but what I did know is that structure worked well for me and structure didn't work well for him. And so that coming together and wanting to do things differently and having those conversations, we realised just how fundamental and important that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think societal gender norms probably plays a part in this, in that I became a house spouse, and I immediately knew what that looked like, what that meant with the jobs that were going to be mine, what I had to do and how I had to do them. I mean, I've mentioned before in other podcasts that I grew up in a high demand religion, where I would say I was basically trained in how to become a good wife. Like, there were literal lessons in how to iron and how to manage a budget and things, which are great life skills to have.
But they should be being taught to everyone.
To everyone, yeah. But so I think that because I come from that background, which is the difference between me and your ex, is that I had some idea of what to do. Even though we suffer with some of the same chaotic mindset and all of those things, I at least had a grounding in, I knew what I needed to do.
You at least, you had the knowledge, the coping strategies, systems in place. And that knowledge of... Surprise, surprise, people are not born knowing how to look after themselves.
No, we're not born knowing how to clean or how to vacuum a house or how often or how to clean a sofa. You know, nobody knows this stuff until we have to know it.
Or grocery shopping.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Jesus Christ, having to feed ourselves. Oh. That is not an area I enjoy. I really like eating. I love food. Food is great. But I definitely much prefer when it just arrives. But at the same time, I recognise that despite my complete disdain of cooking, that it's not fair to expect you to cater to me 24/7, 7 days a week.
Just 80% of that time.
Just 80% of that time. So our current division of labour with the cooking is I cook at weekends and you cook during the week.
Yeah.
You get weekends, quote unquote, off. But the result of that is we then have to put more things in place, like some of the tools and techniques. So we are supposed to have weekly discussions on what I'm cooking at the weekend.
Yeah.
So that you can then get the groceries in for it. So we need to be having these discussions.
We're not very good at actually doing these discussions.
Yeah, we should be having these discussions 2 weeks in advance so that you can then get the groceries in for whatever I want to cook at the weekend, so that then I know what to cook at the weekends. But we're not very good at doing that. So there's all this idealised. We are not perfect.
We're definitely not perfect. But we do have things where we do communicate. Like, if you've seen any of our YouTube videos, you'll know that I have planning systems and card boxes so that Blaze has access to, and if she so wishes, she could go and have a look at and see what's supposed to be happening when, what day is allocated to what cleaning task, all of these things. So that we do share that communication, because we recognise I can't expect you to take over on a day if you have no idea what I have planned for that day.
Yeah, and going back to the food as well, we have a whiteboard where we are supposed to write the meal plan for the week on the whiteboard, so that on a day where you're struggling and you need me to take over the cooking that day, I can just look at the board, know what was for dinner, know that the ingredients are there. I might not know how to cook it or which ingredients you intended, but But generally 80% of the answer is just right there with what you were planning.
Yeah.
And then I can generally get on with it.
And we do that because we have made a decision that I have the bulk of the responsibility for the taking care of us stuff.
Yeah.
If we were in a different situation, we'd be much more equal about that. Equal is the word, isn't it, I'm looking for?
Yeah, equal is when it's 50-50. Equitable is when it's 70-30 for various reasons.
Yeah.
It's still considered fair.
Yeah, so we would make sure it was still fair, but in a different way.
Yeah.
Even if things changed, which they do from time to time.
They do from time to time. So yeah, there's other tools and techniques that we use. So like quite a lot of the time, like before we put these tools and techniques in, I would particularly struggle to be helpful and supportive. And then having to go to you and constantly, how can I help? What can I do? What do you need? How do you do this?
It almost becomes, what's the point? I might as well do it.
Yeah, and we hear this in a lot of households. Like it's a key complaint of, oh, well, if you see something needs doing, can you not just do it? It's like, actually, the skill fade. I know how to do a lot of these things if I was on my own. But if I'm only doing something once every blue moon, actually the skill fade is real. And how different people do things like matters, like how you decide to clean, which tools you're using. That's knowledge that I don't have. And then is this, despite the fact I'm trying and I'm asking you and I want to help, how much of this is quote unquote weaponized incompetence because I know I can just rely on you to tell me what needs doing?
It goes both ways though. It's like I have no idea when the bills are due out, but I know that you've got this.
Yeah.
And that we don't fall behind because you are particularly good at staying on top of that sort of thing.
If suddenly something happened to me and you had to do that, it's not okay to expect you to just walk into a role and just know how to do everything. So then it's that discussion on how much should people know, how much should they be involved at every level, or how much do you accept that this is a specialist skill and focus on them helping in areas that are easier to help in. So like continuing on from that idea that I want to help, but not only I have those skills, I have those knowledge, at least I have a level where I know how laundry should work. Like, I'm an adult. I know how to do those things because I have been taught, and these are life skills that everyone
should be being taught. Like I haven't gone into a lot of detail, but I was genuinely taught how to do these sorts of things, and we had lessons and it was weekly, and you'd learn how to cook spaghetti one week, you'd learn how to cook something else another time, or one time when we had competition on who could iron the best.
But you should probably caveat with not everyone was included.
Not everyone was included in these things. This was specifically aimed at girls only. The boys had a great time. They were playing basketball and football and all sorts of things. Actually, I don't know what they were doing. I have no idea. No concept of what went on in the boys' sections.
I mean, I hope that they were learning DIY and other useful things.
No, I know that wasn't happening.
Oh.
It was football and trips to the cinema and...
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the point is everyone should have learnt those skills. Should have learnt those skills because once you get to an adult, it's really handy to be able to look after yourself and not...
Yeah, before you even worry about looking after anyone else.
But even with, like, knowing how to look after myself and all the knowledge I have, I still have skill fade. I still have to ask you things. Like, even if I know how I would do it, there's still quite a lot that I rely on you for. And ensuring that open communication and us then stopping, thinking and intentionally putting in tools and techniques that allow me to support you that we wouldn't have done had we not stopped to think about that.
Yeah, sorry, the dog is making some really strange noises. She's having a great time down there. I have no idea what you said, I was distracted.
So we said that we would talk about some of the tools and techniques that we have implemented that
Yes.
help facilitate.
So we've talked a little bit about the way we communicate without having to actually speak.
Mm.
But a lot of it is down to open communication. And like if I say, hey, if I say to you, hey, I can't cook dinner tonight, can you do it? It's not just, hey, go cook dinner, make it magically appear.
Mm-mm.
It's, hey, the plan was this, we can do that, or there's a pizza in the freezer, or let's just get Domino's in.
Yeah.
It's
Hashtag not spawn. Yeah, but it's all down to that.
It's not just a, hey, go do this thing for me. It's a, hey, here's the plan, can you take over?
But here's the plan is actually written down so that I don't have to be... If you've got a migraine, like, asking you things is, like, literally the least welcome thing ever. You're just sat in your dark room, and if I want to ask you things, that is not going to be a pleasant conversation for anyone. We've got our control journal, and we've got the index cards, and we've got our whiteboards.
Yeah.
Multiple whiteboards. We have so many whiteboards.
Of course.
And we're supposed to have weekly chats.
Yeah.
We're not so good at those, but we're supposed to do some of this planning together. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other tools and techniques out there
that work, and ours are definitely not the only ones that you can use. These are the ones that we've found work for us because we're quite structured people. We like to have things written down and we like lists, but not everyone works like that. Some people, like, you do what works for you. It might be you just have a conversation and decide. That might be enough.
Yeah, and I'm sure for some households a more laissez-faire approach works well for them, where it is a, if you see it, pick it up. If something needs doing, just do it. And I'll go cook dinner, go and have a look and see what there is, and just use it because there is no plan. That's all very valid and fair. It's just with every technique, with every method, there's pros and cons. So another thing with the division of labour that we really consider in this equity is strengths and weaknesses. You're better at some things, I'm better at other things. It really sucks when we both suck at something.
Yeah, that's why we buy dishwashers.
Yes. And yeah, the dishwasher was a intentional choice because we both stuck at washing up. So within how the division is done, like taking into account the feelings of what feels right, what feels fair, make sure that if resentment is creeping in, you have those conversations early. Yeah,
the conversations aren't necessarily easy to have, but they are definitely worth it. And I'm glad I'm in a place where I can have them much more easier than I used to be able to.
Yeah, and that's pretty much
it.
Yeah.
Communication's important. Everyone is different, which I think is a running theme of everything we talk about. Is everyone's different and everyone matters. So the way that everyone does things is important. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts, then do let us know. You can find us on Instagram or Threads, or check out our YouTube channel. And if you want to hear more from us, then make sure you subscribe or follow from wherever you're hearing this. And I hope that you have a lovely day.
Bye!